The village of Aytoro sat quietly beneath the golden glow of the evening sun, surrounded by thick forests and winding paths that seemed to whisper secrets to those who dared to listen. Life in the village followed a rhythm as old as time itself. Farmers tilled the land at dawn. Traders displayed their goods under the marketplace tree, and elders shared stories that carried the wisdom of generations. It was a place where laughter and hardship lived side by side, where joy was simple and survival was everything. Among the villagers lived Adewale, a man whose name had almost become synonymous with misfortune. His small hut stood at the edge of the village, its walls cracked and its roof barely holding against the rain. Every morning he would rise before the sun, hoping that this day would be different, that his crops would finally grow, that his efforts would finally bear fruit. But no matter how hard he worked, the earth seemed to reject him, as though something unseen had caused his labor. At night, when the village slept, Adewale often sat outside his hut, staring into the darkness with tired eyes. His wife, Morenike, would watch him silently, her heart heavy with worry. Sometimes she would want to speak, to comfort him, but the words never came. Hunger had a way of stealing not just strength, but also hope. And in that silence, something dangerous began to grow inside Adewale, a quiet desperation that refused to die. The villagers talked, as villagers always do. Some pitied him, shaking their heads in sympathy, while others whispered that perhaps his destiny was simply bad. Children were warned not to become like him, and men used his name as an example of failure. Each word, each glance chipped away at his dignity, until one evening, something inside him finally broke. That was the night Adewale made his decision. As the sun disappeared and darkness swallowed the land, he stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on the distant forest, the forbidden forest that no one entered after sunset. The elders had spoken of spirits that lived there, beings that did not belong to the world of men. But in that moment, Adewale was no longer afraid of spirits, because poverty had already become a greater monster. The forest welcomed Adewale with a silence that felt unnatural, as though the air itself was watching him. The deeper he walked, the more the world behind him seemed to disappear. The sounds of the village faded, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of twigs beneath his feet. Every shadow looked alive, stretching and shifting in ways that made his heart race. A cold breeze brushed past him, carrying with it a faint sound, soft at first, almost like the wind, but then clearer, a cry. It was a sorrowful, haunting sound, filled with a pain that did not belong to any human voice. Adewale froze, his body trembling as instinct told him to run, but something stronger, curiosity mixed with desperation, pulled him forward. The crying grew louder as he approached an ancient tree whose twisted roots rose above the ground like the fingers of something buried beneath. And there, sitting at the base of the tree, was the source of the sound. It was a small creature, no bigger than a child, clutching a worn mat tightly against his chest. Its body looked fragile, but its presence carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. The creature slowly lifted its head, revealing eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. When it spoke, its voice echoed strangely, as if coming from two worlds at once. It told Adewale that it had been waiting for someone desperate enough to listen, desperate enough to accept what others would fear. "I can give you wealth," it said, its voice trembling between sadness and something else, something darker. But every gift has a price. For a brief moment, Adewale hesitated. Somewhere deep inside him, a warning tried to rise, a voice telling him to turn back, to leave this place and never return. But then, he thought of his hungry child, his suffering wife, and the years of humiliation he had endured. And just like that, the warning disappeared. Without asking questions, without thinking of consequences, Adewale reached out his hand and took the mat. And in that moment, the forest fell completely silent.
The transformation in Adewale's life did not happen gradually. It came like a storm, sudden and overwhelming, leaving everyone in Aytoro in disbelief. Within days of returning from the forest, opportunities began to fall into his hands, as if guided by invisible forces. Crops he planted grew faster and richer than any farmer had ever seen. Traders offered him deals without hesitation, and money flowed toward him in ways no one could explain. It was as though the earth itself had decided to favor him. His once broken hut was replaced with a large, beautifully crafted house that stood out like a king's palace in the middle of a humble village. The same people who once mocked him now greeted him with forced smiles and hidden envy. Children who avoided him now ran past his house in awe, whispering about his sudden fortune. Adewale had become something more than a man. He had become a mystery. Morineke, his wife, initially embraced the change with gratitude. For the first time in years, she could cook without fear of running out of food. Their child laughed more, played freely, and slept without hunger. But beneath her happiness was a quiet unease she could not explain. Sometimes she would look at Adewale and feel as though he had brought something back from the forest, something that had followed him home. At night, Adewale would sit alone, staring at the woven mat he had taken. The house would be silent, yet his mind would not rest. And then it would begin. The sound, that same soft, sorrowful crying he had heard in the forest, would echo faintly in the distance. At first, it was far away, almost like a memory, but with each passing night, it grew louder, closer, more real. Still, he said nothing. He buried his fear beneath his growing wealth, convincing himself that whatever price existed could not be worse than the poverty he had escaped. But deep down, a truth he refused to face was slowly taking shape, and it was waiting.
The first death came quietly, almost unnoticed, like a whisper in the dark. An old man, respected and loved by the village, went to sleep one night and never woke up. There were no signs of struggle, no sickness, no warning. It was as if something had simply taken his breath away. At first, the villagers mourned and moved on, accepting it as part of life. Death was not unfamiliar to them. But then, just days later, another person died under the same strange circumstances, and then another. Each time, the pattern remained the same. Midnight would pass, and by morning, someone would be gone. Fear began to spread like wildfire. The laughter that once filled the village slowly disappeared, replaced by whispers and anxious glances. Mothers pulled their children closer at night, and men who once walked boldly after dark now hurried home before the sun set. Something was wrong, and everyone could feel it. What made it worse was the sound. Every night, at exactly midnight, the crying returned, clearer now, louder, impossible to ignore. It echoed through the village like a warning, sending chills down the spine of anyone who heard it. Some claimed it came from the forest. Others swore it moved through the streets like a wandering spirit. And though no one dared to say it openly, a thought began to root in the minds of many. The deaths had started the same time Adewale became rich.
The tension in Aytoro reached a breaking point when the village elders gathered beneath the ancient tree to seek answers. Their faces were heavy with worry, their voices low and uncertain. For the first time in years, they had no explanation, no solution, no control over what was happening. It was then that the village's oldest woman stepped forward. She was known for her deep connection to the spiritual world, a woman who had seen things others could not see. Her presence alone commanded silence, and when she spoke, her words carried a weight that settled into the hearts of everyone listening. "This is not ordinary death," she said slowly, her eyes scanning the crowd.
Something has been brought into this village, something that feeds, and until it is satisfied, it will not stop. A wave of fear spread instantly. People began to look at one another, searching for answers, for someone to blame. And slowly, almost naturally, their eyes turned toward one person, Adewale. Morinike noticed it too. The whispers, the glances, the growing suspicion. But what troubled her more was not the village, it was her husband. The way he avoided her gaze, the way he grew restless at night, the way he seemed to be hiding something. And in that moment, she knew the truth was closer than she feared.
That night, when the village fell into uneasy silence, Morinike made a decision she could not turn back from. She waited until Adewale quietly stepped out of the house, moving like someone trying not to be seen. Then, with her heart pounding, she followed him into the darkness. The path to the forest felt longer than usual, each step heavier than the last. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, and the more the world seemed to shift into something unnatural. Morenike struggled to remain hidden, her breath shallow, her fear growing with every second. Then she saw it. Adewale stood before the same twisted tree, his body tense, his head slightly bowed, and in front of him was the creature. No longer crying, it stood still, its glowing eyes fixed on him, the woven mat lying between them like a silent contract. "You are enjoying the gift," the creature said, his voice no longer sorrowful, but cold and knowing. "But every gift must be balanced. Another soul must be taken." Morenike's body froze as the truth crashed over her like a wave. The wealth, the comfort, the life they had gained was being paid for with human lives. And suddenly, everything made sense.
Monike did not sleep that night. She sat in silence, waiting, her mind racing with thoughts too heavy to contain. When Adewale returned, she said nothing at first, but her silence spoke louder than words, and he could feel it. At dawn, she confronted him. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with anger and betrayal. She demanded the truth, her eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. For a moment, Adewale tried to deny it, clinging to the lies he had told himself, but the weight of her gaze broke him. Slowly, painfully, he confessed everything. As the words left his mouth, Morike felt her world collapse. The man she loved, the father of her child, had become the source of the village's suffering. Every death, every cry, every fear, they all traced back to him. "You chose this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You chose wealth over humanity." And for the first time, Adewale had no answer.
The decision to return to the forest was not made lightly. It came from a place of desperation, of guilt, of a desperate need to undo what had been done. Morinike insisted, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. That night, they walked together into the forest, side by side, yet burdened by different weights. Adewale carried guilt, Morinike carried heartbreak, and both carried fear of what awaited them. The forest felt different this time, darker, heavier, as though it recognized them. The air was thick, and the silence was suffocating. Even the sound of their footsteps seemed too loud, echoing unnaturally around them. When they reached the tree, the creature was already there, waiting as though it had known they would come. "You cannot escape what you have started," it said, its voice calm but final. "The balance must be kept." And in that moment, Adewale realized this was never a gift.
Adewale fell to his knees, his body shaking as the reality of his situation fully consumed him. He begged, his voice breaking, offering everything he had gained, the house, the land, the money. None of it mattered anymore. But the creature only watched him, unmoved. What is taken cannot be returned, it said. Only balance can restore what has been broken. The forest grew silent, as if even nature itself was waiting for what would come next. Then slowly, the creature revealed the final condition. To stop the debts, you must give something equal to all you have taken. The meaning was clear, painfully clear. And as Adewale looked at his wife, he understood.
The night ended in silence, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the kind that follows a decision too heavy for words. The kind that lingers long after everything has changed. The next morning, the villagers woke to something they had not felt in weeks. Calm. No crying, no fear, no death. For the first time, the village felt alive again. But as the sun rose higher, a new mystery emerged. Adewale's house was empty. The doors were open, the rooms untouched, but there was no sign of him, Morenike, or their child. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. And from that day on, the story of Adewale became more than just a tale. It became a warning. A reminder whispered from generation to generation that not all blessings are truly blessings, and some wealth comes with a price no one should ever pay.